large mines, but increasingly now dealing with clients who also have municipal loads, and in many cases are paying higher energy tariffs and therefore have the opportunity to perhaps buy cooler toys, battery storage and other solutions. And that's why I thought we would sort of split today a little bit around municipal wheeling and sort of this sort of segment of the market, so to speak. And this afternoon we're having a one talking about decarbonisation and what other energy users are considering. So today's focus is very much on what the various councils or circles are doing, linking to the energy strategy work. As I mentioned, I'll be talking a bit about some of the case studies. And then at the end, Dominic's going to talk about load shedding strategies after Shirley discusses wheeling, because that increasingly is becoming a key topic in our energy strategy. So, what do we do today outside of just running our normal diesel engine? Thank you very much for joining. In terms of I think questions, if you could please post them on the chat and we'll try and work through them. But people in the audience, please raise your hand. I think the idea is to have a discussion, so we'll have to wait until the end. If you have a question, please raise it and we will address it as possible. Thank you very much. Philippa, if you mind coming up and introducing yourself while I navigate through the PowerPoint.
Rob. I am Philippa Rodseth, Manufacturing Circle Executive Director. The Manufacturing Circle, for those of you who...
Yes, so that the people online can.
Okay, great. Philippa Rodseth, Manufacturing Circle Executive Director. For those of you who don't know us, we're an industry association. These are the manufacturing companies that we represent. You'll notice a couple of things. Our member companies sit in different subsectors across the manufacturing sector and different parts of value chains. You might notice an absence of auto, original equipment manufacturers. That's very specific and mindful, given that it's quite a well-structured value chain. Although we do work collaboratively, particularly if there are tiered suppliers who are looking to expand their manufacturing across different competencies. You'll also notice Cresco and other affiliate members that we have as members, so that really we represent, okay, sure, so that we really we look to reflect a manufacturing microcosm overall ecosystem. I've been running Manufacturing Circle for 7 years. I'm originally an architect, possibly a bad thing to mention in front of, I'd imagine, quite a few engineers. And then I did work as a leveraged finance transactor in a bank. So through that lens, I would like to suggest that this is a good portfolio of companies represented at executive level. So what do we do in the Manufacturing Circle? Well, I guess, yeah, maybe I should say, what do we not do? Because really, how long is a piece of string, especially in an environment where industrialization is difficult, although it remains a very important sector to grow. And broadly speaking, there are two areas. The one is demand side interventions. How do I identify projects, unlock opportunities that are going to look to secure manufactured product? When we speak to most of our Manufacturing Circle members, many of them are operating under maximum production capacity, and that's a function of anemic GDP growth. And that's being, should I say, diplomatic, and also, overall global challenges. So demand side opportunities, that's really if I were to prioritize, our highest priority. But then on the flip side, what are the supply side challenges that need to be addressed? And there, well, it's quite a laundry list. So getting quite good, I think, that the Manufacturing Circle is targeting sort of areas and issues, and how do we unlock those? How do we understand those? And how do we sort of identify how find ways that our manufacturers can operate more efficiently. So that now brings me to our position and understanding of the energy landscape, because again, you know, running the manufacturing circle, I find it very much operating at the coalface. Large manufacturers, many of them have multiple factories, and it's really where the rubber hits the road, because if you've got a problem at your factory in terms of municipal service delivery by way of electricity or water, then you know, things become quite difficult. So last year in October, we scheduled an electricity forum, and with the thought in mind that electricity, you know, and the broader energy landscape that supports that deals with both aspects as far as manufacturing is concerned. Where are the demand side opportunities? I mean, we've got renewable energy programs. Eskom needs to build 8,000 kilometers of transmission line, and at the same time, how do we address our supply side challenges? Also, as Manufacturing Circle, our previous chairperson in NAMPAC days is now Eskom's chief executive. So we looked to seeing how it is that we could work or enable some of the challenges that utility currently faces. So we started to try to understand and unpack this over 3 consecutive sessions, and we always say we do workshops, not talk shops. We wanted to understand the state we're in and the way forward. Where are we now, and where are manufacturers? I mean, the bottom line is we're not in a great space. The second was, well, then how do we close that generation gap? And simply put, you can be more efficient with what you do use, and we also need to generate more. So those are parallel aspects. And there we've been working quite a lot with Cresco. And then the third, you know, looking ahead and the move towards renewables. So that really sort of set the overall landscape, but then we looked to what sort of areas, where can we drill down in detail. So I show you Exhibit A, which we produced, called the Electricity Forum Now What? But we've actually renamed it What Next? We thought that was a little more proactive to say, okay, so across energy efficiency, how can we understand from Cresco, link up with them as to how our existing manufacturers can be more efficient? Or, you know, where are the opportunities for their, you know, for them to secure other sources of energy? And that then took us to, we had another session end of June, where again, we looked at energy interventions. We drilled down more into municipalities and service delivery. So I think really, you know, to also say that we're not the only ones who are mindful of this. Manufacturing Circle is a member of BUSA. There's also many other various initiatives. We're going to hear from James shortly. But, you know, and this I would really say from the top down. This is, you know, the 10 points of what needs to be done. What we're quite interested in at the Manufacturing Circle is the how, and really I would call it the bottom up. So how do we do these things? And what are we doing? And sometimes I actually really do ask myself this, more of a philosophical aspect. So what we've been doing, in addition to understanding you know, the landscape of our manufacturers by factory, by demand, with the view to possibly identifying opportunities for you know, a renewable energy play or aggregate demand. And again, this is where you know, we look to working with Cresco and their expertise. We also looked in a lot of detail at the city of Ekurhuleni, and more specifically, the Springs JVA substation, which is really quite an indicative example of what's happening across many different municipalities. We have some of our Manufacturing Circle members have plants in that area comprising PFG Glass, Impact, Springs Mill, Isaac Saint-Gobain, and really there are 6 high energy users in that geography that really use about 70% of the current provision by that substation. And it's really been a litany of frustrations and errors for quite some time. So we took the initiative to say, well, can we just map this out? Can we objectively, I mean, it's really not rocket science, and if you don't have electricity, you can't function. But let's spell this out in terms of what this unstable power supply is, how it is impacting on operations, jobs, etc. And noting that in this specific situation, this is not anything to do with Eskom to the municipality. This is to do with municipal service delivery directly. And we mapped out, the interruptions, etc. And we came up with some pretty practical, we also mapped out the impacts. If you see the money spent across these different plants in terms of, alternative supply, self-generation, that's not so much in the renewable energy space. So really we started to quantify that, and we proposed quite a simple solution at the outset in terms of having better engagement with the city, particularly the head of Department of Electricity and the responsible parties. However, some of you may have heard the story. We put out this briefing note, we presented to the then mayor, who's now back as the mayor, and manufacturers have residents in electrical engineer competencies. How can we work together? And then, so that was put out on the 18th of October, and on the 8th of November, the substation burnt down to the ground. And on that basis, it's been about 10 days. I think energy is slowly coming back, but I mean, one can understand and respect these catastrophic implications. So where to from here? And I guess maybe I'm also not being too rhetorical. I mean, apart from the day-to-day firefighting, I mean, there's the action on the ground that these manufacturers need to address. But what really keeps me awake at night, I think, as Manufacturing Circle on behalf of our members and the broader industry is, how can we be doing things differently? What are our medium to long-term plans? Where can we become a little more self-reliant and self-sufficient, noting that there are different solutions for different opportunities. So I think that really is a scene setting as to what's happening from a very detailed at the coalface level, and why we do feel it's very important to be engaging in a collaborative manner to see, I mean, there's wheeling, but then there's cost of supply studies that have to come first, and we have wheeling, you still have to have a substation that works. So, I want to understand those things so that we can come up with some proactive solutions, because this is really, where we're heading. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Philippa. I don't know if there's any questions now for Philippa around what Manufacturing Circle might do. I hope your next example will be a slightly nicer finish to the story rather than burn down.
I hope so too.
But any specific questions before we move on to James? Cool, thank you. James, I don't know if you want to wander up. Sorry, we seem to have a little bit of an issue with sharing of slides, so I'm going to try and reset it while James comes and does his introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, that looks fine. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Philippa. This is the classic consultant's dream, the bottom up and top down. So hopefully we'll meet in the middle with a good solution. Afternoon. So my name is James Mackay. I'm the sort of CEO of the New Energy Council of South Africa, newly established. So we sort of new on the block, and Rob keeps asking me, why do we need another energy organization? So I'm sure many people, and a lot of people do kind of ask the same question. In a kind of strange way, actually, I was having some interesting conversation today from the other side. It's about time we have an energy organization, because everyone's having to play in the energy space by default, because there's actually no coordination and the noise is just immense, and we really are facing a huge crisis. So it's actually a pity we didn't actually have a proper council to drive some unity and direction, years ago. It's overdue and well needed. And certainly in other sort of sectors, when we look at sort of things like in the minerals space and sort of banking associations, etc. I think a strong, unified, coordinated association actually sort of does make a big difference and does help. So that was really the intention in the background of establishing the Energy Council. So we are representative of all business. So maybe, okay, so what's made it difficult for me? Okay, so you can see that. So we representative of all business. And I think an important point is not private sector, but public and private sector. So the likes of Eskom, IDC, and CEF Group are founding members and also on the board. So it's really to kind of create a unified voice of business, very much focused on the energy transition. I'm a firm believer it is, we've passed the tipping point. It's happening already. We are behind the curve. I think as a country, we're facing a huge amount of risk, and we've got to speed up. So the transition must be rapid, and currently I think we are seeing it as gradual. There's some interesting stats. I was also recently at COP, and we are the most sort of carbon intensive economy. I think we're the third most emissions intensive economy globally. So our transition pathway is going to be a lot more challenging than our peers. And we will get shut out of global markets on an economic basis if we don't transition rapidly. So we've got to move, and we need a sustainable long-term plan to do that. That takes a lot of investment. This is where Rob gets very excited, and you must all go and talk to him because he can help you. But we've seen recently the JETP programs at 1.5 trillion in really three sectors only. That's not the full number, and that was really by 2035. So I think it's the full ambition of our energy transition and what we would like to achieve, when one also includes things like JET, is probably not affordable for a developing economy and where we are. Philippa made a really important point around low growth, a stagnant economy for some time, coming off a low base. We really do have some big challenges. So we really do need to think about scale and pace, and that really is about financing. And the moment we've got to think a lot deeper about that. It's not just a cost estimate, but what does bankability look like? What's affordability look like? And how does that actually kind of map out? And then obviously it's a sort of a very clear energy policy regulatory certainty, which is also where business comes in. So we need confidence to invest, to grow our business, and to drive in the space. So that's really what the sort of the Energy Council has been set up to do. Kind of very quickly, I won't go through it in detail, but really it's around a broader view of the energy sector. Probably a few key things. As we said, we will kind of try and, as best as possible, take a technology agnostic kind of view. So I welcome a discussion on coal. If we can say that there's a great idea and we are leaders in technology around CCS and we think we could make it commercially viable, well, then let's talk coal. But what we do need to understand, and this is the key drivers, where are the non-negotiables? And some of the non-negotiables will be climate change. Okay, so what does climate change mean for us? If we are outside of those non-negotiables, then it does become a hard conversation around technology. But within that, we need to keep options alive. So maybe there is small-scale modular nuclear reactors coming out of China and Russia that really work for us. Let's leave the conversation open, and let's allow some of those things to be ventilated. So I think it's important that we need to move and not shut down some of these conversations too quickly. And that's part of the process of kind of, I think, creating a better platform and engagement with government. So certainly we've been endorsed by government. I think we have some strong backing and good relations, and we're trying to really build those because, we desperately need government to be part of this journey. They can't be bystanders. Okay, so maybe just around building on that kind of concept, and also a case of the transition will be rapid, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be lumpy and challenging, and probably we will not be able to achieve the level of ambition that we'd like. So we've also got to be realistic, and for me, I think also in the IPP in the corporate IPP programs, we are not going to achieve the scale when we are sort of doing one-to-one transactions. So we need to think more holistically, and so what we're trying to do is make sure that we keep some frameworks around the plan. So certainly we've got to start with Team SA. So when we think about how we drive things, it's got to be what's good for the country more broadly. Then when we think about the energy transition, it's got to be market-led, because ultimately it's going to be a system transition. And then we've got to think about those non-negotiables. So certainly climate change is going to drive the speed. And so if I look at discussions I've had with execs in my member base, so pulp and paper, ferroalloys in the steel sector, in the automotive sector, pretty much all organizations are saying they're facing quite hard kind of consumer barriers by 2030, where if they are not achieving a pass rate on green credentials, they will actually start just losing market position. So this is not a 2050 game. It's actually, we have to by 27, 28, understand very clearly what our glide path is around the transition. We've got to understand what those look like, how we're going to create the investment, and we've got to be able to meet those timeframes, or risk falling out on the back of carbon tax, CBAMs, ETS, all of these penalty mechanisms that we will just run into as this very carbon intensive economy. So I think those are some of the things which we really got to think about quite hard, and they take time. So we've got to make a consolidation of efforts, and we've got to work at this quite quickly. I won't touch on this too much, but I think that, I've kind of already said it. What's really for me, what's not working at the moment is that I think government tend to a little bit say that the energy transition is a climate issue, therefore we've got till 2050. The reality is that, as I said today, I think that it's an economic, it's a commercial, and then it becomes a social issue. And we don't have till 2050. We've got to actually get a plan in place quite quickly. So we've got to move a lot quicker. We've got to balance that. Pathway to scale is going to be really the most challenging part. As a developing economy, we can't afford the sort of inflation reduction program of the US, Fit for 55, all these type of big incentive programs. So that's going to leave the role of government in a very difficult space. To what extent can they rapidly liberalize the market to encourage private sector investment and let private sector take the lead? And what does that mean for a role of government going forward? So we're going to have to think quite differently in this future, very decentralized, digitized, variable energy type of market system. And then at the moment, the sort of gas, no gas, coal, no coal type of conversation is not helping. I think we've got to move away from the technology standoff and try and move towards a holistic system integration thinking and the system sort of move, which again is, I think, why sort of wheeling and specifically municipal wheeling and sustainable municipal utilities is going to be really critical to that kind of sustainable sort of transition. On the other hand, I must say just some of the things which I think are things that we should celebrate is that we've got some amazing pockets of excellence across our business and private sector. They're doing fantastic things and implementing catalyst and sort of pilot projects that are, keep at sort of world's best practice and are being put out there as sort of international examples. Even our Just Energy Transition Investment Framework, I participated in a few sessions. It's being used really as a framework, as a guiding framework for a lot of other developing economies to follow. It was at COP was put out there as groundbreaking, huge international recognition for it, for the work that South Africa has done. Off the back of that, Indonesia has taken exactly actually that model, and we banked 8.5 billion. They've just banked 20 billion. So they've taken it and upgraded. But really a lot of recognition, even if you look at, like Sasol's sustainable aviation fuels, Mackay hydrogen trucks, there's lots of examples where we've got pockets of excellence. What we've got to find a way is to scale those up. That's going to be the challenge. But the fundamentals of our economy are still good. You know, when you talk to international players and people go, you know, South Africa is really the economy that needs to get this right. You're the most carbon intensive, but you've got such strong fundamentals still. You are an economy that you can invest in and make a difference, but you're also small enough that a little bit of international funding actually can go a long way. How do we make this work? I think there's a lot of positive sentiment that certainly I got from conversations at COP. So I think there's certain things that we must take away as we are doing well, and we must kind of move on it. Yeah, and so I think that we are a sort of, it's early days, and I've only been there for a month, so and I'm still employee number one, so I make the coffee, I do anything. And but we are really trying to be inclusive of the energy sector. We're trying to broaden very quickly. You can see already, we're representing, from banking, financial, industrials. We're kind of trying to bring now a lot more of the renewable energy, clean tech companies and organizations on board. So we balance the voice and the views, because this is definitely it's a SA team kind of position that we have to drive. It's not a big business and the sort of historical sort of energy intensive type of organizations that we're representing. Okay, so I hope that was insightful and useful, and looking forward to the conversation. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, James. Once again, before we sort of take it from strategic level down to talk about cost of wheeling in a lot of detail, are there any questions for James before he runs away? Okay, easy as that. Thank you. So I always can't do two things at once, is my experience. So I'm going to explain wheeling today and save Shirley the hassle of having to do it for the 150th time. And then she can correct me afterwards in terms of where I got it wrong. But I think that the key topics I wanted to touch on is two case studies, large user and a smaller user, really using the same technologies, as James mentioned, technology agnostic, although in this case very focused on renewables. The fact that storage has now made a crossover point in our view, mostly for mini-flex type clients, or those that maybe not mega-flex yet, and we see real application. And then we're going to talk about a bit of a wheeling case study. And then, as I said, Shirley's going to talk about Eskom wheeling, and also a little bit more about virtual wheeling and some of the opportunities out there to overcome some of the shortfalls. I think all of these slides will be available and sent to everyone afterwards, so you don't have to take bad pictures at an angle. If you want to, please do. Yeah. So different clients, different loads, different IPPs, different number of zeros. We all are limited by the same technologies. On-site PV, wheeled PV, generally wheeled wind, and increasingly storage, and then different types of storage depending on your price point in that. But the typical pathway for most clients has a similar trajectory. This is a large load, so these are generally using megaflex type loads. Much nicer from a wheeling point of view, because these loads can buy all the energy of a utility scale project, and the scale of project finance is achievable. However, their energy cost is much lower, and therefore the ability to buy cool toys, new storage technologies, I think is limited. But this is the typical approach. We now have a smaller case study, 100 loads, 27 munis. I think that's the hard bit. An 80 megawatt load, similar technology. So on-site PV, wheeled PV, and things like that. Looking at different wheeling, focused on perhaps municipalities that are more wheeling ready, and we, if that is defined, we do have a view on wheeling readiness at a conceptual level, but same technologies. But the storage option for them, for this client, is very different. In many cases, they're running diesel generation already, and therefore sort of 40-foot container batteries is already at the price point, and they have the ability to install these and offset it. You obviously need to charge batteries with energy. So if you have load shedding and you can't charge the battery, that is also a constraint. So we're working around that, and that's linked to a little bit of the load shedding strategy. But everyone is largely using similar technologies at different approaches. Now, in terms of a decarbonisation world, so we have the phase 1 25% penetration, and this is sort of what was set in 2020. Single assets, PV or wind, variable tariffs, not dispatchable in any way, debt and equity termination values. And what we're seeing with many of our clients is they're trying to balance achieving renewable penetration along with CO2 targets versus savings, because this still needs to make some financial sense. This idea of paying a green premium, I think, works okay if energy is 5% of your cost base, but if it's 20% higher, it's just not affordable. And if you add all the other costs of doing business in South Africa, you can't actually afford to pay a green premium versus the termination value. So the cost, or even on an IPP basis, of the guarantee for this can be pretty big. So if you just took a typical utility scale PV project, 1 megawatt costs 20 million rand to build. Simplistically, if you procure 1,000 megawatts on that earlier slide, and you have to put up your full balance sheet of debt and equity, that's a 20 billion rand balance sheet impact. And that's before we add storage. If you add storage on 1 megawatt, then you're up to 30, 40 million rand a megawatt. So the size of these renewable interventions versus the balance sheet is just impossible. But as the projects are progressing and as penetration is getting higher, the market precedent is increasing, wheeling's more increasing, we are super comfortable with the technology. The regulatory certainty comes, we are seeing that termination values are decreasing. Therefore, theoretically, you can afford different technologies with your same balance sheet. And we're seeing situations now in which banks are willing to take revenue multiples as opposed to debt and equity. And that 20 million rand per megawatt is maybe going down to 15 million rand, 12 million rand a megawatt. And over time, we hopefully even go to 8. And then eventually we might get to this mythical situation where there's no termination values like you see in a completely developed market. And that's where everything has to happen more at the same time for us to go. But increasingly, we're seeing, sorry, I should actually use the pointing at cursors that are not helpful. This approach, the 80% penetration level, and the requirement to get there needing energy co, corporate finance, portfolio project finance. So in our view, the old one single load, one single generator that we're seeing today is not where we're going to go over the long term. I think James touched on it well in terms around the portfolio approach. It's all of us working together. So you might get a situation in which 10 clients of 10 megawatt loads each buy 100 megawatts of utility. And that way they're getting the benefit of utility scale pricing. The transaction costs need to be reduced. And through that, you can start getting to these higher penetration levels there. But this is how, for us, the energy strategy is progressing. Now let's take it even a further situation. So we have a client with a site in Joburg. This could be anywhere. This is just one in Joburg. We were asked to come in and look at some of their optionality. We looked at some of their data sets. Unfortunately, we had COVID a couple of years ago, so that we didn't have many people in the office. We have half of this year. We have half of next year. So we don't have a perfect data set, but we're trying to infer a data set. This client has a gas agreement, but in many cases, you could also have a diesel agreement in place because in many cases, they have thermal loads already in place. So now we need to build this into this. Now, this is looking at progressing the energy strategy with initially a rooftop and then perhaps a land-based solution separated. We're looking at traditionally losing PV and BESS initially there. Rooftop only, PV and BESS, we can get to 20 to 40% penetration levels. And the installation time here is actually quite short. So unlike a wheeled project where we are probably waiting for financial close, then construction. So most projects that are achieving financial close in the wheeled sector now are only probably going to come online middle of 2024. Where these sort of interventions, we can have them in the ground by the middle to end of next year, subject to any CapEx constraints. In the stage of the process, we're actually at RFP stage. So we actually are procuring PV, which we know has been a no-brainer for a while, but we're also procuring battery energy storage. And we're getting quality, credible bids from battery providers linked to this. We have asked for a split between generation and generation plus battery because we do want to understand the value of the battery. And we're conscious that at the moment, you can't get a battery price that's valid for more than 48 hours. So the battery price today might not be the battery price when we actually procure in 2 months' time. So we've asked for a fair little granularity. But in our view, for a mini flex client with this situation, this theoretically, we should be able to achieve this sort of penetration level with a positive NPV of savings within the next 9 months. Now, in terms of the sector that is probably the most advanced in terms of renewable energy is actually the commercial property market, where the Growth Points and the Redefines have been installing these and had them. I think Growth Point's first project was in 2015 or something like that. They, however, from what I understand in the work we've done, are not unfortunately currently looking at large-scale BESS, but that is happening at the moment. And many of these clients have been traditionally limited by their ability to overproduce because they couldn't sell that power into the grid. Because unfortunately for many of the large commercial office blocks, they have a daytime load, less nighttime load. In this case, we have a 24/7 load. It's linked to sort of a large data center type requirements. So their energy requirements are much higher than potentially a commercial load. But with the ability to now intra-wheel within a municipality or sell under the standard offer program and things like that, we have the ability for people to add more PV panels onto the roof to put into a combination of battery storage, sell excess energy. And for us, there's probably at least 1,000 or 2,000 additional megawatts of rooftop solar in the commercial space that could be deployed in the next 2 years. And this, is, to a certain extent, is very much under the radar projects because it doesn't need a NERSA license or anything like that. It generally doesn't require project finance. And this for us is a huge market segment that is currently sort of a little bit not being considered within the general press. Now, what we did was, as you do, we have this theoretical target of 100% renewables. We then did a whole lot of analysis around with different BESS dispatch profiles, what could we get to? And this is a very simple example of, so this is a 72-hour period in the year. And typically, you might have Tuesday the 22nd, where there's not great generation because we have cloud. We have a semi-cloudy day, and then we have a no cloudy day. So when you break those down to P50 hourly analysis, you have this volatility that comes into your standard analysis. So over here, we have gas generating, we have the PV from the load, we have the PV dispatching to the battery. And one of the options with a smaller PV and a smaller BESS is the fact that we will only offset peak demand. And this for us is probably the first point of financial metric because we know peak tariffs are substantially higher than non-peak tariffs. And with this amount of overgeneration, you could put in place a small BESS that will dispatch for only 2 or 3 hours. And you can see here, obviously, depending on the PV availability, it depends on the penetration level you have in the BESS. If we have the ability to get much higher PV on site, and in some cases, there might be a piece of adjacent land or even someone else's rooftop next door for some clients, we can then oversize the PV generation, significantly oversize the BESS, and change the BESS dispatch profile. In this case, we have the benefit of being able to run the gas more consistently. Or if you have a load setting issue and you're sitting on the back of a substation that burnt down, your diesel is now a load, your present. And now we can dispatch the BESS mostly during the year. We obviously have much higher overgeneration because of the higher PV, and we can get much higher penetration rates. Based on our current financial analysis, the one on the left is a no-brainer, and it should have been procured probably 3 months ago, although the BESS price are changing. This for us is still a question mark. We don't quite believe that this level of BESS dispatchability based on a large battery of this scale quite makes financial sense today. But if you do take into account that energy tariffs are going up, mini-flex tariffs are going up higher than general energy tariffs, and then you add on the fact that municipalities tend to have a margin on top of mini-flex they sell. So we think this price point might actually be maybe not next year, but the year after that. We still question, I guess, to a certain extent, how much N+ configuration you need at this scale. When you are running data centers or hospitals and stuff like that, do you want to totally be reliant on a PV and a BESS system at this stage? I think you'd rather use someone else's experiences first. And this has been very much the experience that we have. So we have another case study, which is probably our most interesting project from a technology point of view. It's a mineral sands project in Madagascar. It happens to sit on the port in the Indian Ocean on a hill. So they have PV and wind, and theoretically they can produce 5 or 6 times as much generation as the load needs. It's a 15 megawatt HFO offset. But we can only get to 60% renewable penetration there because of technical constraints, because the mine has a sensitive load and without the battery moving there. So in that scenario, the price point is not the concern. It's actually a technical constraint on the mine. So unfortunately, as much as we would love to get net zero, we unfortunately are miles away, never mind from a pure price point of view, but actually from a technology point too. But achieving this sort of penetration levels, 60% or so, we think we're at least only 1 or 2 years away from that. And that maybe is where the technology is not the risk, it's more the financial impact. Okay. Eskom and Eskom wheeling and unbundling. So I think what Eskom has done in the last couple of years in terms of what they say is what they're doing, and let's talk about the unbundling rather than power station and AF, different department. They seem to put their money where their mouth is. Not that they, I think, have been the problem. I think it's generally been political will to push through. But we have seen the system operator, the split of the legal entities, and I know the current retail tariff application of August this year is the first start of unbundling the tariffs, until eventually you theoretically might get 2 bills eventually from a distribution or transmission or generation, or if you're wheeling, you might get 4 or 5 bills, and of which Eskom is just one of your generators. So this was I think this is Eskom's view, the dates here, they might have changed since here, and this is Cresco's view, and our view is that NERSA always takes 1 year to approve it. I think certain members of the Eskom team have been good at negotiating. You ask a bit more, you get less, and then it comes through the next year. Let's say it's part of the negotiation strategy. But we believe by 2027, we potentially could have a full day-ahead balancing market in place in South Africa. Maybe not a fully traded market, but there will be a number of bilaterals happening and things like that, and balancing power will be, which for James's comment about we need to make sure by 2030 we have something real, this is really important to unlock renewables, because you need to sell the excess energy, there needs to be the power going through things. So this regulatory constraint is probably one of the biggest issues for us outside of NERSA regulation, to make sure that we achieve the penetration levels that people need. And the private sector market will make it happen. It's having the political push, and I guess to a certain extent, NERSA's approval, because that often is the issue, to allow this to happen. As I mentioned, please ask questions as we go along. The idea is not for it to be a complete diatribe. And if people disagree with what I'm saying, that's actually probably more appreciated, and then we can debate it for minutes. Thank you. So wheeling. So I've touched on an Eskom one and a municipal one just to add a bit of complexity. I think, Shirley, this is your slide from probably 2017 and sort of been there for a while. Fundamentally, nothing has changed. I know the tariffs have changed. But I think what we want to consider here is a municipal wheeling idea. So you have a typical Eskom Muni connection, where you have a wind IPP really connected to an Eskom. You have the PV also, this is utility, connected to an Eskom transmission line. Eskom is connected to the municipal and selling under the WEPS rates, and the municipality itself is selling to 2 loads or potentially more than one load itself. So this is for us what your typical wheeling scenario will look like in a municipal client. I think what is required because of the scale is, because hopefully these are 100 megawatt projects and get the scale. What we're also potentially seeing is that there could be smaller projects within municipalities. And I know Cape Town Munis currently have got an RFP out to say, are there any current projects available that we can buy? But in reality, I don't know why Cape Town has to buy it. Surely there's a lot of users in Cape Town who could buy the power on behalf of that and wheel the power as long as Cape Town facilitates the wheeling transaction. I'm not convinced their current tariffing regime facilitated, but from a technical point of view, they should allow. And in certain cases, they could actually offer a certain element of guarantee of supply. So really what happens is you inject at this point, they meter. Eskom and the Muni have a meter. You don't see this really in a wheeling deal. And then the load in the municipality basically meter themselves. And then a credit is allocated at whatever the relevant rate is. If it's an Eskom load, it's at the WEPS rate. If it's a Muni load, it could be at the Cape Town wheeling rate. If it's Nelson Mandela Bay, it used to be a fixed fee. And then certain other munis all have their different approaches coming through the system. And I think this is what we need to see more of. We've seen some of this already largely facilitated by some traders, but the current wheeling in municipalities, I think if it's 10 megawatts, it's a lot. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, it's really small and it's sort of excess energy type stuff. We're really not seeing the scale that we'd hope to see at this level. And there's no reason why this couldn't be increased in scale substantially.
Right. In the case of that substation, does that physically sit in the Eskom?
So in your example, it
Yeah.
sits there.
Okay.
Fortunately, they will have their own substation. They will have their own substation and that, because the wheeling is a commercial transaction. I think the only wheeling deal we know of in the region where the energy actually flows is from Cobora Bassa to Zimbabwe, because the flow actually goes through them. But most other wheeling deals, there's no actual flow of energy, unfortunately. So your burnt out substation, unfortunately, sitting there.
Physical constraints.
Yeah.
What about if you're looking at a smaller embedded generation project, like you said, where they have excess energy and they want to feed that into either Eskom directly or a municipality and then feed that out to varying loads, wherever they may be? Where would that fit in this kind of?
Yeah, so that would be in this example, sort of sitting up the left, if you can imagine this is in the municipal network. So that IPP would kind of sit on the municipal side of supply. Now, we have a really good example of that already, bio to what? 2 or 4 megawatt, depending on what day of the week they're producing.
Depends on engine.
And they're wheeling to BMW. And I understand, and we do have someone in the room who financed that deal, and maybe he's willing to stand up and talk about it. But I understand one of the benefits of this deal is that the buyer managed to get negotiated in which both loads would not be load shed or cut off or reduced load as a way of ensuring the bankability. Now, I know generally under most wheeling deals and an Eskom connected, that is not a guarantee. If there's a network event, there's a network event. But that is something that I believe the municipality could consider because of their current
It's
situation.
a feeding in tariff, really, isn't it? So if you've got an embedded generation project where they have excess generation, or even they've actually put it in place to do that, feeding into that municipality to reduce their own bill. But it seems there's been a lot of talk around it with Lenny, with different Cape Town municipalities. But I think there's a lack of clarity on what actually feed-in tariffs can be available for different applications.
Yeah, so I mean, my concern is it's actually less about a feed-in tariff and stuff like that. It's generally municipalities don't procure very well.
Oh,
Okay. And they have this thing called PFMA, and if you do REAP's quite heavy for a 10 megawatt PV project, and most good projects would rather bid in REAP because it's than bid into City of Tshwane's RFP. But a private sector person can do a deal within 9 months, as long as the regular. And why would you not use the private sector's balance sheet to fund the deal? The municipality will still make its loss of profits, but as long as it's reasonable. So for me, that is where the market was going. We don't actually need municipalities to procure renewable energy. Municipalities should rather, all due respect, be procuring baseload power, which at scale, small embedded renewables of batteries should be done.
You're saying company A can sell to company B using the network.
Yeah, and the network then perhaps can provide some additional comfort around it. Now, obviously, if the substation burns down and there's no redundancy, that is a concern. The question is who takes that risk. At the moment, the buyer takes that risk, and I generally experience the buyer takes that risk. But if the municipality was willing to provide some sort of wrap around that situation where they take a bit of a first loss, then to a certain extent, their cost of their wheeling tariff might be more justified. Yeah.
Just on that structure, obviously there is some constraints that prohibits that from happening. This needs the buy-in from the municipality, in principle, and then secondly, to make sure that the municipality is not against the Eskom. And that creates some stumbling blocks in the implementation of that model.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. So, there's a number of issues. So if you just break down around, so there's firstly the municipality, and we do touch on some of the other slides, but let's touch on now. The municipality needs to have done a cost of service study, preferably one that is really about their cost of service. I know GIZ are funding a number of cost of service studies. Then they need to have published a municipal wheeling regime, hopefully one that makes sense. Then NERSA has to approve the wheeling regime. Then someone needs to put it in an Excel spreadsheet and work out actually how expensive is this wheeling. Because some of these tariffs you put in, it gets pretty expensive. Then they need to make sure that they on good credit terms with Eskom. Then you need to sign a deal that makes sense. So there are a number of things that still need to flow for it to work. Some unis are substantially ahead. Unfortunately, of the 27 munis on the earlier slide, we've told our client only to focus on 3 because 24 munis.
Which are they?
Yeah, I was going to say.
So Cape Town, George, NMBM would be the 3 probably most advanced. And then I guess Ukulele, City Power are developing their methodologies, and we hope we'll have something soon. But I don't believe there is a deal being done on this basis yet. I think there are a few negotiated deals done within a municipality in those jurisdictions. Oh, that was good. So cost of wheeling. So I'm using an Eskom regime. So 12.9 cents is the answer. It's pretty simple. I don't know why people make it so difficult. But it does depend on it. So I'm not sure why they're so small. Generation profile of the generator use of systems charge, the load profile of the load transmission zone, the load voltage connection, how Eskom treats the subsidies. That all really drives the 12.9 cents, and it'll change over time. So what we get involved in is obviously as part of the sort of push towards this theoretical 100%. As part of our renewable procurement, we're looking at different technologies, and we're calculating the NPV of savings. And for us, the wheeling cost in an Eskom connected site is really simplistically the cost between your savings on wheeling and the cost if your theoretical generator was sitting behind the meter on the same thing. And that is simplistically the Eskom wheeling cost. You don't see that in an Eskom bill because it's the difference between the credit and the losses. On munis, you will actually sometimes see a municipal wheeling fee. But for us, that is probably the easiest way to describe it. And the next question is, it's not actually about the savings today. So the Eskom wheeling spreadsheet that works really well kind of looks at today only, or maybe next year, and you can put in next year's tariffs. But when you're looking at 20 years, there's a number of changes. The retail tariff pricing that was recently submitted has given us some view of what can change. Plus, I think Cresco has a view of what could also change over time as cost-reflective tariffs come back in there. But one of the key things that is going to change is the morning to the evening. So if you just look at that, you have more red now. You had more red in the morning for PV and you have less red in the evening, whereas the contra is the beneficial for wind. So solar is negatively impacted by this versus wind. For most municipality clients who have smaller loads, all due respect, they're going to be procuring PV rather than wind, because wind is generally bigger projects. There's this idea of the generator capacity charge, a fixed charge. Notionally, this was considered 23%, but now you can actually calculate it based on your actual load demand. But that's generally for lower customers, and depending on your load factor of your demand, it has a different impact on you. So obviously, a smelter is probably less of an impact than if you are a sort of only operate during the day type client. There's significant rebalancing of the tariff from standard and off-peak, which also unfortunately negatively impacts solar over wind. And then for us, that's currently not in your current retail tariff structure, but it's the idea of the balancing market. And Keith Bone from Eskom recently did a webinar with Cresco, and I know he's been presenting this a while, around the multi-market model. I do have a few slides on it later, I think, or a later presentation around when the market basically partially liberalizes, the fact that balancing power will be more valuable, as you can imagine, because generally balancing power will come in the early evenings, in the morning, when this renewable bubble comes out. And if you assume that your balancing power is the alternative cost of generation, then that could be Ankerlich, with diesel in its tanks as opposed to without, which could be, I don't know, I'm not sure what Eskom's paying for petrol as the or diesel, close to eight rand or so. Let's hope it's not that level. But what is really important for us in terms of the work we're doing is this really impacts the IPP and its ability to forecast its generation, because it needs to forecast to the load, because the load will then forecast to Eskom what it requires. And if the wind says it's going to blow and it doesn't, and you said you didn't need it, you theoretically could pay the balancing charge. And as I said, if the wind, you said it would blow at 12 o'clock in the day, I'm talking about 5 years' time now, because most PPAs are 20 years. So for the majority of the PPA period, this is going to be an issue. And as I said, under this scenario, if you said you were going to get 100 megawatt hours from wind, it doesn't blow, You then need to go into the balancing market. At that stage, we probably have an oversupply of PV, and therefore your alternative cost of energy is PV, 85 cents or whatever it is. If that 100 megawatt hours of wind was coming at 6 o'clock in the evening, that balancing charge could be closer to 5 or 6 rand. And this is what energy companies or companies need to consider right now as part of their energy strategy. So it's not just a random. In terms of analyzing NPV of savings, to be honest, looking at the generators, pretty easy because we kind of know what benchmarks are. Okay, the IPPs hide a bit in OPEX, but there's only so much they can hide. There's a little bit of there, and we have a fairly good idea of what's real and what's not real. I am conscious that debt terms today and debt terms when you achieve financial close is probably the big issue at the moment. Swap rates and stuff, and Jaco, my colleagues, unpacking that a bit later. But the biggest question we spend is actually looking at the load, because we generally don't have one generator. We're looking at a number of generators over time, and that's obviously their demand, time of use over time. There's summer winter splits. If you're a mine, you have life of mine coming off, and you have new mines coming on. What are the macros around that? So Eskom's long-term pricing, US CPI. How is Eskom tariff adjustments affecting things? This idea of deemed energy or excess energy when you start piling too much PV at the same time of the day, and then ultimately the balance sheet impact. So when we do an analysis as a transaction advisor, this is pretty much where we spend most of our time. Admittedly, you probably have more than one generator, but this for us is a lot more transparent than, because this is many cases is a little bit of crystal ball gazing. So for a 100 megawatt PV project and a 330 megawatt load, and you could say 15 and 33, the principles are the same, just maybe not millions, you'll have hundreds of thousands, but the same idea. So we have generator generating in this time of use period. So this is a sort of a PV and not the greatest part of the generation pool, but reasonable. We have the Eskom load before the IPPs there, and this is their typical thing. So it's a base load load. We have the load after we offset the IPP's cost, and really the different, and then the IPP tariff. Unfortunately, we don't see 70 cents anymore with current exchange rates and current costs. Probably much higher than this for these type of projects. We have the energy cost from the IPP, and then we have the Eskom tariff more around that, and then we have savings of 261 million. When you add in the wheeling costs, as I've mentioned, and then you add in theoretically some notional balancing costs, that all detracts from the savings. And now you have theoretically what on the face of it looks like a 40% renewable penetration just on megawatts, probably quite a bit less than that on megawatt hours. But on that side, which theoretically is quite a big intervention, we're only seeing 7% savings over 20 years on that typical bill. This is without the benefit of carbon, because I'm conscious that carbon could change this answer, but at the moment we can't offset the value of carbon against our carbon tax bill. And this is the conundrum most of our clients are considering. Now, for a mini-flex client, the energy cost per kilowatt hour would be much higher, but they're also not going to get scaled utility pricing. So unfortunately, this picture is not materially different for a mini-flex client either, even if it's 15 and 33 as your offset numbers. Okay, electricity landscape. Now, this is, as I mentioned, Keith, this was the view of the multi-market model, hopefully coming in 3 to 5 years. Some of it already, I guess, in an infancy in terms of internally Eskom has the information. And the day-ahead market, the intraday markets, I mean, really probably mimicking 80% of what happens in SAP north of our border. And I mean, not many of you deal within SAP, but we have a very advanced market north of the border, 12 countries, of which, unfortunately, in South Africa, only Eskom is the only person playing. But I believe a lot of the lessons learned and what happens in SAP could be transferred south, and there's very benefits there. This works well in an Eskom regime. It then comes to the question that Badger asked around, how do we do it within a municipal regime? So this was Cresco's view, very subjectively, no science behind this, of what we think is wheeling readiness. And then we have a key stakeholder in the industry, who I haven't seen here today yet, I'm not sure if he's willing to put his hand up and say anything, around wheeling readiness. And, you know, for me, Eskom is 8 out of 10. I think the concern why you didn't score full marks is your Excel spreadsheet works well and everything like that. We just don't like the numbers from a cost point of view, but it is what it is. But pretty wheeling ready. Nelson Mandela Bay actually been doing small scale wheeling for a while. Swanee talking about it. Cape Town theoretically more advanced, but not really wheeling. And then the others, George probably the most advanced, and the others there. And I think if you started adding some other municipalities, I don't think you'd get more than 2, to be honest, on the list. So we are probably very limited in terms of where we believe municipalities will be able to wheel, at least for, in my view, within the next year or 2. The other problem is that each of these municipalities do things completely differently. And how do you, as a 100 megawatt utility scale project, PV project, sell to 10 loads in 10 municipalities with 10 different clients with 10 different municipal regimes? So the only people who are going to get rich are the lawyers. Hopefully a little bit of the advisor too, but mostly the lawyers. So the complexity around this is severe. And you know, as much as I only score Eskom 8 out of 10, it would be great if each of these municipalities used the Eskom methodology. Yes, they'll have different price points, but that some sort of standardization, I think, would move the market materially quicker than anything else. Because at the moment, this is very difficult to plan around. This is a bit around, this is an extract of the slide, also Keith's one, around the transition phase and the market phase. But I think for me, this is the big thing, is sort of April 2027 when we have a view of when things will come. So it is pretty soon, and we need to plan for it. This is a comparison between Eskom and Cape Town. So I think just to recap on Eskom, which is in the spreadsheet, you have the energy purchase from Eskom based on the time of use, and then the applicable tariff. And then you get the benefit of the credit, and that's based on the energy wheeled and the time of use. And then you get the WEPS credit, which is if you're a Megaflex client, is the Megaflex tariff less the transmission losses. Simplistically, if you are a different tariff structure, the cost of wheeling is slightly higher. In the Cape Town scenario, there's a fair bit more complexity, and I don't see my colleague who did the analysis here. So if you have very detailed questions, I will answer them later. But basically, Cape Town has issued a wheeling fee, a tariff book, which you then pay for the wheeling, the cost of the wheeling, but you're also paying for the energy. And it makes the whole tariff discussion and the calculation substantially more complicated, adds a fair bit few kilobytes to the Excel calculations, but we think we've managed to mimic it correctly. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of precedents. So unlike Eskom, where we can actually run our Excel model and compare it with a bill, in Cape Town, we don't have that. So we are inferring some of these. So that's my legal caveat around the numbers we're showing, but we think it is hopefully pretty straightforward. If you just look at a Miniflex client, Eskom versus Cape Town, slightly different thing, but not miles away, besides for maybe high demand off-peak in terms of their tariff, like for like. So we should actually be comparing not quite apples and oranges, or sort of green apples, maybe green apples and red apples. But when you compare the credit, which is probably the most important part of the bill, there's substantially higher credits being received under the Eskom program as opposed to the Cape Town program. And basically anything between the 59 and the 96 of that is the increased cost of wheeling within a Cape Town regime, which then makes Cape Town wheeling so much more expensive or less savings, depending on which side of the things you're looking at. And unfortunately, when we mimic other municipalities, which we haven't done as much work on and therefore not presented graphically, we see a similar situation, is that the municipality's credit is substantially lower than an Eskom equivalent. And that then does require, to a certain extent, either the client starts paying a bit of a green premium for wheeling, or that the client needs to start procuring bigger amounts of bigger projects to get the benefit of the scale. Because obviously a 10 megawatt project is not going to be the same as a 100 megawatt tariff.
Rob, have you shared this with City of Cape Town, this analysis?
No. We are engaging with them at the moment, but we haven't actually presented to Cape Town.
You have no idea what their response would be to this and the justification for those deltas?
Well, I think we know what the justification for the delta is, that there's a huge cross-subsidization between energy and water, and this is all loss of profits, because ultimately, all due respect, their generation cost is WEPS, which isn't that much different to an Eskom connected site. And yes, there's a bit of distribution things, but you know, outside of building these substations, it shouldn't be that material. So, and it's been the old issue, is the fact that there's this huge issue between water and electricity for years. And so that is one of the fundamental issues in the tariffing, that situation here. We're not quite sure what Cape Town's doing, to be honest. I think it's like they have the RFP out, they're procuring this, they're talking about this, they've got great stories about pump storage, but we're not actually seeing a lot happening. The pilot program looks good, but they're still only wheeling from Darling, which they've been doing for 10 years. So kind of we are watching, waiting. So that next level of detail down, but I thought it was probably hopefully a good segue into Shirley. I'm not sure how much time I wasted in terms of timing. But thank you very much. Any questions before I jump off? Thank you. Shirley, I'll let you introduce yourself while I find your slides.
What's my question that the benefits that you've calculated that wasn't new tariffs for first tariff for existing?
That would have been for 2022 tariffs, 2023 tariffs, I think.
What is
Yes, it is. So it's the new tariff book, but that's at a point in time. It's not on NPV with all the tariff adjustments. So it doesn't take into account all the changes. That the NPV calculation later was over 20 years. That's a point in time calculation at a date for the credit only. A similar analysis, just a different time point.
Rob's, is this on?
Yes. Just need to stand.
I do have a fear. I once did a whole speech without this on and nobody told me. And it was in a big hall. It's actually at an AMU meeting. Okay. So I'm actually I've only got a few slides. I think Rob has really explained how we do wheeling, and we put up our wheeling framework. It's actually been in place since 2008. Myself developed it, and it's evolving. And it's evolving even more. And one of the reasons why we are actually having to evolve the way we do wheeling is exactly because of, number one, wheeling to customers within municipalities. And number two, we're getting an increasing number of parties that are wanting to wheel to multiple points of supply. So a big shopping conglomerate, whatever, wants to now wheel to all their points of supply across South Africa, and that's in Eskom areas of supply and in municipal areas of supply, and a lot of them are connected at low voltage. We typically don't allow low voltage wheeling. So we're starting to have to evolve in the way that we actually do this. And so I've only got a few slides because I really want us to spend a bit of time in talking about it. So this is really our existing wheeling framework, which Rob really explained nicely to you. And basically, at the bottom, you can see if you are wheeling, the first is you can get the amount that is payable before wheeling. And the way we do it is we charge for all the energy that goes through the Eskom meter. There's no netting of wheeled energy. And then we do a subtraction on the bill for the wheeled energy. So it's an accounting, financial, commercial transaction. We don't chase the electron from where the generator is to where the load is. We measure what the generators put on, we subtract it at the buyer or the off-taker side. And so you will see your use of system charges, like your transmission is the same before wheeling and after wheeling. But you will see there's a credit that starts to happen on the energy portion. And we know because Eskom has now gone and split the energy charges, and it's sitting with the regulator at the moment, into a capacity charge and a variable charge, that this wheeling benefit is reduced slightly. Well, by 20%, but I've seen some numbers that were shown to me over the period of these contracts, it's going to be more than maybe 20%. So the big thing is we do a credit it gets done on the bill, and it works. Where you've got a large customer and a large generator, you can actually do this. What happens when you now start to have to so what happens when it's not so simple anymore, where you don't have a clear one-to-one relationship between a generator and an off-taker? And you start to get parties that are traders or aggregators or people, like I mentioned, like, for example, shopping centers or telecom suppliers. So while this methodology that we have works very nicely for these one-to-one, it's not going to work where you have thousands of customers potentially buying from one or two generators. To do this on a bill, the complexity is just, it's not going to work. So we are looking at other methods. And by the way, when I say we're looking, it's still under investigation, but this is just maybe to spark your interest in terms of this, where you go to sort of a virtual wheeling type approach, where you are dealing with an aggregator, with a trader, and then this party actually does the allocation for you. So this is the kind of approach that we could look at, where you have a trader who is selling electricity to a customer. This trader is buying from a generator or multiple generators. This data then gets aggregated into some kind of a platform. This then gets refunded in the same way that the current refund works with wheeling to this trader, and then there's a contract for differences between the customer and the trader. The other advantage of this is it can deal with accounts beyond the Munich boundary. We do not need to enter into a contract with the municipality. All that is needed is the data that comes in. And there is an assumption, if the customer was in the Munich, that there is a payment to Eskom. Because we can't be doing these wheeling transactions if we're not getting paid on the main account. So it's still, there's always going to be that challenge for any customer that sits within a municipality that is in debt to Eskom. What this does is we don't need to contract with the municipality. We just contract with the trader, and we need to get all the data. The data needs to be auditable. We do all the reconciliation, and by the way, this could accommodate multiple parties. It doesn't have to be a single party, or it could be a single party. We still want to keep the traditional wheeling, what I call traditional wheeling, as a mechanism, but we are being pushed now to look at this, to do this kind of option. It's still under investigation. There's still a lot of work. Just the accounting of this is going to be complex, because we do not want this refund to be seen as a purchase of energy or procurement, because then you're sitting in a totally different legal space in that regard. So I've just put there's many more challenges, but Rob touched on this. There's no national wheeling framework, so everybody does it differently. So anybody and you could have customers that sit in multiple municipal jurisdictions, and every one of those jurisdictions does it differently. I don't know how you enter into PPAs where that is the case. Some units are following the Eskom approach and others are doing something differently. And the NERSA involvement is not certain. We were told in a session the other day that NERSA told one of the municipalities who had submitted their wheeling tariffs for approval that NERSA is not going to approve wheeling tariffs. We're assuming it's the credit mechanism because it's outside of NERSA's mandate. They've made a similar statement with net metering or net billing, or what municipalities are calling their SSEG tariffs, where they've actually said it's outside of their mandate. We are also involved in, since the president's speech, to look at feed-in tariffs, to look at wheeling, to look at net billing. So there's a whole exercise being done on that. And Rob mentioned the standard offer. The standard offer is an Eskom program where we will buy excess energy, and that's a kind of a feed-in tariff, but it's only set for 3 years. The rate, though, is lower than the WEPS rate excluding losses. So the WEPS rate excluding losses is still the best rate, even though people are complaining it's too low. And the only way you can get that rate higher is to get higher price increases from NERSA. So you solve one part of the problem, but everybody else suffers. So Eskom would obviously would like the price increases we apply for to be approved. But I think the big issue here is we do need a national wheeling framework. We do need standardization in the way it gets done. Doesn't necessarily have to be done in the way Eskom is doing it. I know when we did some presentations to some international consultants that were helping Eskom and Salga and whatever, they were extremely baffled by the way we did wheeling. It just baffled them. It's a credit mechanism. And I just said to them, but how else do you do it? And I never really got a good answer. So, yeah. The big thing is, I think a lot of other jurisdictions, the energy, they buy 100% of their energy, where we are always going to, because you're never going to be able to supply 100% of your energy through a wheeling transaction unless you have a fantastically well-matched profile. And I mean, it's impossible, you said so. So you're always going to have this mix of energy supplied by Eskom / the municipality and your supplier, either the trader or the IPP itself. So thanks. That was just touching on it. Questions?
Just on your previous slide.
Yeah. Good job.
Why do you expect the customers to pay Eskom and not the trader?
So this customer is the customer that is connected to your grid.
In a municipal area.
It could be a municipality. This customer would be the municipality or an Eskom direct customer. Okay. So this is the Eskom customer,
Okay.
Either the municipality or the, and we're assuming this, if you're looking at the traditional wheeling transaction, this refund would go to the customer. Okay. In this one, it doesn't go to the customer. It's between the trader and the customer how this refund works. We're just assuming this is the payment per normal accounts. So there's no crediting on the customer's account under this scenario.
Yeah, trader would invoice the customer.
Yes. So there's a payment here between the trader and its customer.
Isn't it better than trader to pay Eskom or avoid the municipality risk?
So the trader doesn't pay Eskom. Look, we've had people say to us, they will take the responsibility of this customer, but it works only though if it's not a municipality. So they will pay Eskom on behalf of this customer. Customer still gets a bill from Eskom. I can see you're a bit baffled. So how this will work is we do not contract for wheeling with this party. This party pays as normal. It's and what happens now is this energy, the energy that the generators put onto the grid, doesn't belong to Eskom, but it goes onto our grid. So we got to give it back. We don't give it back to this customer as we do in the traditional wheeling approach. We give it back to the trader. And the trader in turn needs to deal with how this works.
Okay, but is that customer is complaining just a residual?
No, it's the full bill. The residual payment gets done through the refund. Because we do not want to, for example, be doing 4,000, and remember some of these are small points of supply, like 16 kVA points of supply, thousands of them. For us to now take 100 megawatt and split it up between 4,000 or 5,000 points of supply, where the consumption is 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, it's just, we're not going to do that. So this trader actually manages that process. Doesn't get done on the bill. It gets done through some kind of consolidated, aggregated method. It's work in progress though. So you know,
But
it's
it's
work in
an
progress.
attempt to bypass the wheeling constraints in the municipalities and take the credit risk out of it that you currently have. So the trader then, he will take the metering risk on the other side. And they will take the accounting and credit process risk.
Yes. So let's say the customer is within a unit. We obviously don't have their metering data, but we would need it to be able to settle the generator and whatever. So this trader then becomes responsible to put the meters in and to provide that data. And then this becomes a settlement process only, where there's an in from the account and an out.
But I mean, practically, you would have 1,000 points. The trader manages 1,000 points of delivery, and they will send you one consolidated data, and then you would do it at a global level.
Yes.
And then you would spot check them in an audit basis.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
No, it's
So you're not actually getting every bill, they're aggregating it, and then you'll get one set of data for an aggregated load.
and the accounting treatment of this becomes very complex.
Yeah.
But it's basically almost creating, it's a precursor to almost a market. But this becomes just a settlement. This is not a procurement of power. There's a debit here and there's a credit there. And this credit is for the wheeled energy. Because here we actually got payment for including the wheeled energy. And here we must get the refund.
So there's a small working capital period between, because you're paying the full amount and you're only getting it back in the next period. So you need to build that into your cost of wheeling.
Yeah, and the timing of this
Yeah.
and all of that could be.
And your comments on the, sorry, I'm just jumping into questions. Your comment last on the other one about NERSA not approving tariffs. What do you believe their involvement would be in this structure? Because I'm conscious that NERSA recently are now setting tariffs, or proposing tariffs under the Megaflex structure, and they don't quite seem to be sure where they're playing.
So we are trying to set up a meeting to understand the decisions as part of this national working group that has come out of the president's speech, to sort of understand their particular role in this. We know that in the draft EPP actually says NERSA must develop this framework. And we know they have attempted to do something in the third-party access framework that in 2012. But we do believe that this is necessary. So if NERSA doesn't do it, somebody else has to do it. That at least there's an industry. But we're starting discussions with them to understand the comment that Ekurhuleni made about their wheeling tariff, and also letters that were sent to other municipalities where NERSA said they're not approving these because it's a commercial arrangement, and for municipalities that sits with their council.
Pretty inconsistent.
Well, I just think it's risky. Because we are working in a regulated space, and this is not procurement of energy. I understand if it's about procurement of energy, where you are actually going out and you're buying the energy, it's 100%. That's a commercial arrangement. This is not procurement. This is really just offsetting energy that somebody's put onto your grid. You've used it, but it doesn't belong to you, so you've got to give it back. That's effectively what wheeling is about. It's about it's the accounting treatment of this wheeled energy. That's what it is. And for municipalities, they don't need to make it very complex. If they give the same credit to, they don't even have to have updated tariffs. If they give the same credits that we are, which is basically their avoided cost is what? This transaction, what they would have paid Eskom plus losses. Or less losses, depending on who you look at.
So conscious behind all of this is the Salga court case and the munis and Eskom connected, which I believe will take the focus away from municipal wheeling, at least from a focus point of view. So is this really the opportunity to get large scale wheeling in place into municipalities that maybe aren't as advanced as Cape Town? Or are there other options out there?
Well, I suppose one of them is to look at this virtual wheeling. Only thing is, again, if the municipality is in debt, and of course that's a systemic problem that this wheeling is not going to solve.
That is already answered from my PV, Shirley, we did have a few discussions in the past. I would like to take the conversation maybe in a slightly different space, if I may. When we talk about wheeling, it's actually wheeling in the current environment that we are in today. But from the conversations and the exchanges we had during the day, we know that there are going to be changes, and one important part of the change will be the fossil load balancing with energy sources coming into the grid. So, in that context, what role do you see wheeling to play in terms of the load balancing, whether it will play a role in load balancing and how that would be accomplished?
The important thing is supply needs to be matched by the demand. Okay, and when it's not, then you start to have imbalance. And the party at the moment that manages the balancing is Eskom generation. And we know we are dealing with old power stations. Going into the future, this balancing market needs to be put in place. Now, one of the things is the Electricity Regulation Act is in the process of being amended. We've not seen the final version. And in there's allowing for the market operator to be in place. And out of this will become this balancing environment. And I suppose you say Keith has done a presentation before on balancing.
We did the webinar with us.
Okay. So, but really the big thing is to try and match supply and demand. So people are going to become balance responsible parties. And we're assuming generators, potentially traders, retailers, which are Eskom distribution or municipalities, will become balance responsible and have to give day-ahead forecasts. And parties that create imbalance can either paid if they assist or get charged if they are causing a constraint. When wheeling comes in, and the thing is, this is also going to be true for all generators, we're assuming, of a certain size. And for the ones that are smaller, then the distributor or the municipality will be responsible. So going into the future, that is going to be an important point. So whether you're wheeling or you an Eskom generator, everybody will have to participate in this balancing environment. And maybe the way wheeling will work might be done more on forecasts and then settled afterwards. So wheeling gets done on what you forecast for the next day and then gets settled afterwards. that is also some of the thoughts that I said. Don't know if I've answered your question though.
That was a very good explanation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to take it maybe just one step further. So, I mean, in the presentation, we saw that, you know, when consumers bring batteries on, they are capable actually of absorbing these peaks solar during the day and thereby actually optimize their own situation. And they will do that also in a framework where they're sanctioned if they are in imbalance. But possibly these type of players, and you know, there are few and far between at the moment, but give it another 2 or 3 years, we will possibly see huge battery banks on the grid that may be then used actually not only as, you know, energy security type of functionality, but also of the type of balancing functionality that they would play possibly with the tariffs in order to optimize their financial position. Actually, that making this balancing to make this effective.
Yes, it becomes a kind of balancing is really an ancillary service. So it will be an ancillary service that you potentially would contract and get paid for.
So all the RFPs that Cresco is currently involved in, not the on-site one that I showed you there, because that was more based offsetting discussion. We're asking for one of the bids to be ancillary services or upgraded to peak shaving. We believe that's where the market is for large events. And so we're asking for generation only, ancillary service offer and a optimized base solution. So we believe that it is at that scale, we probably will procure something like that next year to cover exactly that demand that we discussed.
Yeah, but it's an interesting dynamic because let's just say the generator that has storage capacity has made a promise to the consumer to actually sell at that time of the day that type of energy, and next time around the generator realizes that the amount of electricity to balance the grid has a tariff that is much more attractive than that he actually entered into an agreement with the consumer. So all of a sudden you get actually a triangular situation where the generator is only honoring the agreement to his original customer to the extent that he contractually has, and then actually optimizes his position to sell actually into the grid.
But I mean, I think as long as a buyer, they're getting what they asked and were contracted, they should be happy. And I think in many PPAs, we're asking for first rights of refusal. Obviously, that's not possible in sustained demand and service. You don't have the time to do it. But our view is then that we're also allowing IPPs to sell excess energy. So the same thing would apply to that. So if the IPP wants to add more battery banks on his existing site, it doesn't affect our contract, but maybe could optimize the contract, then that's for the benefit of the IPP, because the higher revenue the IPP gets, theoretically, the lower tariff the buyer will get over time if it's ancillary services. I think the idea of having that's my PV panel and I am the only owner, those days are gone a little bit now. It might physically be like that from a contracting point of view, but in reality, energy is going in there.
So then maybe just another question on that topic. The connection user system agreement obviously is the tool to say 20% of this account, 20% of that account. So that process actually requires communication with Eskom, and Eskom makes a commitment to do that change within a period of maximum 30 days. Now, in that dynamic environment, this tool obviously becomes a bottleneck. But is Eskom to that?
No, you look at lunch, you look by lunch.
So we can very question.
I think the question was around the nomination of the buyers, and currently it's done in the connection use of system agreement where you say, okay, 20% to this one party, 80% to another, and you're saying how we're going to make that more dynamic.
Yeah.
So one of the things we are looking at is automating this on our billing system. We're also looking at evolving our whole data management of the information, that eventually this could almost be a web-based thing where you would change, somebody who's given permission can go in, change that allocation, and it automatically gets done. So there's work being done in that space. At the moment, it's a bit manual. but we're working on automating it firstly in the billing system. And we've been testing it, and it's actually working very nicely. You basically log the register, the meter register, or whatever it's called. It's gone out of my head, and it gets linked to the off-taker side, and then the allocation is in the, and you can change it. And then in future, we are hoping that this becomes more web-based.
Thank you for the answers.
Cool. I think one more question for Shirley before we go to load sharing topic.
There we go. I get load shed just for everybody.
So you really get preferential. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much, Shirley. As we said, this link will be sent out afterwards. So Dom, do you want to come up while I find my way around my computer? Apologies for those of you who are on the online who can't hear the questions. We didn't have 2 mics today. Dom, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? I don't think I need a mic.
I think you do for the
You're
online.
on that mic.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Dominic Gonzalez with Cresco, focusing on decarbonisation solutions mostly. But today my topic is slightly different, talking about load shedding. I'll be probably quite quick, 5 or 6 slides, basically just designed to stimulate some thought. So sorry to go directly after Shirley from Eskom and talk about load shedding, but sometimes it's bad timing. And as Shirley said, sometimes they can get load shedded as well. And I think that the key point to make is that there's exceptional work being done in the wheeling space, but as we all know, that certainly is not enough with regards to load shedding. So I think just want to paint the picture. We all know this, so I won't hammer it in. But there's no realistic saving grace to load shedding in the short term. There's no magical solutions. I think that there's really sort of 2 scenarios going forward. One is chronic persistent load shedding, at least for the next 5 years, probably longer. And the other one is a system of total national power system collapse. So I think that to paint that very negative picture, I want to maybe take it up from there. But I think the main question to ask here is, what preparations are you taking for your business, and can you take? And I think that one of the main points I want to mention is that this is no longer just a South African scenario. This is now a global scenario. So the energy transition is causing a number of glitches, both on our existing power systems and the power systems that we are transitioning onto, and will continue to do so. So although we've been in this for more than a decade, other somehow first world countries are now experiencing this for the first time, and they are needing to actually look at solutions in the same way that we are. So going to talk about really 2 things, developing a strategy of resilience and autonomy for your power system or for your business. And then a little bit about on-site generation options or captive power options. So, yeah, I think to jump into the next slide, this is a bit of a data dump of some different potential solutions out there. So Cresco is obviously doing a lot of energy strategy work for large corporate energy consumers in South Africa and in the rest of Africa as well. Some completely off grid and others grid connected, but obviously connected to a weak and unstable grid, which is our situation. And as mentioned, this is now also a global situation. So I think the point to mention is that as climate change has thrown the world into a number of climate change events, what we've seen happen globally is that parts of the world in the last specifically 2 to 3 years or 3 to 4 years have come under significant load shedding, with grids being taken offline. And as such, a lot of solutions providers are really rushing to develop and improve their solutions. So I think that what we are certainly seeing is that that solutions are upgrading very frequently, and that it makes sense to continually look to the market and to see what solutions might have changed since you've last looked. It's no longer just diesel. There's other technologies out there, and there's other parts of the world where we can perhaps also take some learnings from and apply for our market. And looking there at newer solutions such as fuel cells. We all talk about green hydrogen. And we realize that that's got quite a way to go, but there's also different types of solutions, solid oxide fuel cells not using hydrogen that are in place in places like California, working at hospitals and data centers where they need 24/7 power. So really, I think the point is to stimulate debate, and I'm aware that there's a mixture of players in the room from both the demand and the supply side. There's solutions providers, energy solutions providers. And then there's energy consumers. And so from Cresco's side, we've embarked recently for some of our large corporate clients on looking at upgraded solutions that are available on the market. As South Africans, we all know that there's been a number of fly-by-night solutions that we've all come across in recent years. But at the same time, there's existing reputable players that are upgrading their solutions, and also new players that are coming on board globally, where perhaps could be a good fit for us. So I've just listed some of those there on this slide. Also, just looking at optimizing, on-site diesel generation and fuel supply, looking at things such as optimizing contractual arrangements, looking at putting in backup and additional options to build in layers of resilience. We're seeing, in the global case, and in our case as well, that's obviously the key, is just bolstering it with layers of resilience, because kicking the tires and all of these things, the point is to make your business as autonomous as possible. So where you are in the country, you of course might have better luck or worse luck with regards to different things, but we're working with a couple of our clients on this, and we'd be very happy to look at this with some of you from the corporate energy user perspective. In my previous job before Cresco, I was working at Abengoa. My role was one of my roles there was head of microgrids. Had quite a lot of experience working globally, looking at microgrids using both renewables and fossil fuel generation and different types of batteries. We did quite a lot of work in the Caribbean, in Florida and California. We did quite a lot of work back in 2018, 2019 in California, which was getting hit quite heavily by wildfires. PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, and some others raised some tenders. We responded to that. At the time, they all failed because basically the wildfires were requiring that a sort of a ride-through capacity or autonomous power would need to be provided for 7 days. That was the extent of how often the power outages were happening, being caused by the wildfires. The site visit there, they took us to the edge of the substations. You could see the fire damage. In a market such as California, with all that money and all that technology, we're rapidly looking for solutions. And at the time, there were no solutions. It was a failed tender. But that was 3 or 4 years ago. Times have changed, technology has upgraded, and markets like that are very fast looking towards autonomy. Renewable energy obviously can provide a certain amount of autonomy so long as the sun shines and the wind blows. I spent quite a bit of time in Spain in my previous job, and actually earlier this year in March, April, there was a sort of a climate change event called the Calima, where a whole bunch of sand from the Sahara went across the Sahara into Spain and covered a lot of the solar panels, both PV and CSP. So you had, Spain is a very different situation to us. About a third of their grid currently working on solar. And for 3 to 4 days in different provinces in Spain, they had blackouts because there was just sand covering all the panels. They needed to be cleaned. They were damaged, etc., and so on and so forth. Germany last year, we also had that issue where it was just simply not windy for a while. So renewables can build a lot of autonomy, but it's not the silver bullet, as we know. And batteries and long duration storage are in different levels of commercialization and deployment. So I think the point here is to look at different profiles of technologies and different solutions and different approaches, whether it's wheeled solutions, whether it's completely on-site or captive solutions. But I think, here in South Africa and also globally, this is something going forward that we are all facing. And perhaps what's good for us is to know that, it's a global issue. And so for us, it's really looking at mixing and matching some of those generation and storage options and energy efficiency, et cetera, to really provide the best different layers of resilience for your business. This is something that, looking at the Caribbean example, we developed a microgrid on one of the islands that kept on getting hit by hurricanes. And, Puerto Rico, for example, has on average 6 weeks a year where the power grid is completely knocked out. And, it's similar issues in southern Florida. So these are things where we can also look to different markets, see what they are deploying there, and see if things might make sense here. As mentioned, we don't have all the answers, but we believe it's important to build on these layers of resilience. In Europe right now, everybody, man on the street, is very concerned about the war in the Ukraine and are they going to be able to get electricity and heating this winter? It seems that they've made phenomenal progress the last 2-3 months with their storage units of gas, FSRUs arriving, all sorts of things. And so it seems that the crisis should be largely avoided this winter, but depending on how long the war goes on, that might not be the case. But certainly from residential through to heavy industrial users in Europe, this is on everybody's minds. In Ireland right now, every Monday, a lot of large corporates, we were just there, printed out the weekly load shedding risk report in Ireland, in Dublin. And so, yeah, I think just to close out, the South African experience that we all have is now a global experience. The energy transition is going to have some glitches, both on our existing power supply. We're seeing that, fossil fuel divestment away from coal. We're seeing, gas being concentrated in pockets such as Russia, geopolitical, sort of deglobalization. All of these effects are taking, conventional technologies that have always been able to provide us with security of supply and making them somehow unreliable. And another key example is to look at France's nuclear fleet, which everybody has said for ages is just so reliable. But, the latest intel is that the energy availability factor is around 55%. They're having chronic problems with the nuclear fleet. So every technology you look at, whether the new technologies or the technologies we're currently relying on, are going to have some problems. And really, issues from grids getting knocked out to issues about autonomy, one needs to build effective layers of resilience. So energy transition is not going to be easy. It's not going to be smooth. I think we all know that. And please come speak to us if you have any queries about your business. So we don't have all the answers, but we're looking at a bunch of different solutions in a sort of a systematic and pragmatic way. I think what James mentioned earlier was very interesting. I think that we need to all get our head out of the bucket of looking at this from a technology standoff point of view. It's not about the evil fossil fuel lobbies or the clean energy angels, all of the sort of mud throwing on either side. Both systems have issues about reliability and security of supply, and it's a transition. So we need to look at all different options to ensure resilience. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Yes.
Do you have any visibility on Eskom's microgrid build program? I know Shirley's also in the room, but just, no,
I don't have. I know we're looking at it, okay. And there's work being done on that, but I'm not really involved.
Yeah, no, I would have assumed it's maybe not your game, but part of the Just Energy transition team. I'm interested from a manufacturing circle perspective, given that there might be opportunities.
All I can say to you is the microgrids are very expensive, especially if you are not good at time.
Depends. I've seen some cheap ones. I've seen sort of 7 to 9 US cents kilowatt hour for some systems.
Maybe
R1.20, R1.30. For me, it's fascinating because globally, microgrids is quite a big thing. And in South Africa, we've had a couple projects that haven't really gone forward. And even our understanding of what microgrids are is not really, sometimes they're grid connected, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're fully renewable, sometimes they're not. They can be a whole bunch of different things. It's basically mixing and matching different types of generation, different types of storage with an energy management system. You can have trading happening. You can also have it fully autonomous. There's a lot of really interesting case studies and there's projects out there from all of the remote power markets in the world, from places like Alaska, sort of Canada, obviously, throughout Africa, a couple of cases. But looking at markets like California, which is really huge in the microgrid space. And Puerto Rico, so PREPA, the utility there is bankrupt, has been for a number of years. And each time they try to fix the power grid, another hurricane comes and knocks it out. So it goes from disaster to disaster to disaster. And there's, sort of a several $billion US program there around actually forgetting about restoring the national grid altogether and putting in a whole bunch of different microgrids, mini grids throughout the whole island. because it doesn't make sense to have that island interconnected, because the hurricanes are consistent and they come every year, and there's 3 or 4 of them a year, and so they're actually moving towards a completely decentralized grid. There's issues around financing that because utilities bank, there's all sorts of issues around that, but there's also a lot of industrials and corporates there. There's pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer's there making vaccine, has been making vaccine, all sorts of companies that are acquiring power that are putting in their own systems using cogen, trigen, using all sorts of different things. Solar thermal, sort of industrial scale solar thermal providing heat and steam and those kind of things. So I think the point is that we, from my view, need to get out of sort of, I wouldn't say antiquated thinking, but I think what we've been presented with on this market is really the first set of technologies and the first set of options. Sort of solar, wind, diesel gensets, and a bit of cogen and trigen here and there. But there's also other things that are coming into place. And I think that as I say, there's billions of dollars being put into this globally, and that maybe some of those are applicable for our market.
Question. Yeah, a bit of a gloomy picture. So, sorry. And in the gloom one, just maybe you should kind of rethink one of your opening statements there around a realistic kind of complete national blackout and disaster. So maybe just think about that. But so my question is that, so I agree with you, there are resilience issues. I don't think at this stage in the resilience issues, we actually have a supply problem. So gensets and all these sort of smaller technologies are not going to give us scale. One of the big debates at the moment is gas can give us scale, but gas doesn't really have the runway for the cost in terms of if one looks at impact of climate change and where does it fit in moving towards a variable sort of energy system and what will that look like in the future. So I don't know if you've thought through how the technology pathways can move when one sort of looks at the role of gas, and if you've got any views on it.
I'm not sure the specific question, just in terms of looking at pathways in terms of the technology from a gas supply or a sort of the equipment point of view, or are you looking at the fuel supply point of view?
The role of gas
the role of gas in South Africa.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, you haven't.
No, I mean, obviously we've been looking at if it's like
LNG.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Maybe I can jump in and answer the question. So I mean,
all corporate energy strategy is not just renewables, and it's not just your view of Eskom's price changes. It needs to consider other technologies. So gas obviously is a no-brainer, but we don't see one corporate procuring 1,000 kilowatt CCGT. Firstly, it needs to be paid in dollars, so you probably need a few. So we are looking at that. We have done a few small market studies to look at gas. We have some examples of RMIPP of what gas might cost under a certain dispatch profile from various projects we're aware of. But for us, gas, and to take that thinking further, imported hydro is another, not quite fully dispatchable, but that's part of some of the thinking that we're having. But they all are 5 to 8 years away, because you're not going to build a gas-fired power station in that timeline based on the current regulatory regimes.
I suppose, like, kind of question is, well, we don't. If we had a gas market and we had sort of a deep gas market, that's fine. You can make those decisions. But we actually don't have a gas market, and we've got a declining supply. So we've got a supply cliff already. So when one talks about the innovation and the role of different technologies, we all agree that this is a bit of a lumpy pathway going ahead. What does that look like? Because the kind of obvious solution of let's use gas in some form of modular thing, build it out, and we've got 20, 30 years, and that doesn't really exist. So to your point, if it's going to take 5 to 8 years to build it, but you've actually only got 15 years of runway in the emissions window, what and how do you kind of bring gas into the mix, or don't you? And what other technologies can you blend into that? No,
I mean,
CNG. What is a gas?
Yeah, I mean, it's CNG. Yeah, I mean, we've seen an increased number of CNG projects, imported containers from Matola. We adjudicated a bid into Zimbabwe last year where offsetting HFO as an alternative, because you needed thermal, was actually pretty well priced. And we were just concerned with the number of CNG containers we need to get from Matola, because it was never been done before. But at a price point, it was good, and the engines are available. So if you're talking at the 1,000 megawatt level,
Definitely not. If you are a poor 20 megawatt person who doesn't have a substation, definitely it's an option. So it does depend on your scale.
There's also a lot of the sort of mining houses and different places looking at LPG as a stepping stone to LNG. So they're starting off with that, using the same engine technology with the view of when LNG in 5, 8, 17,000 years time comes to South Africa, they can transition over. And that's
But again, we supply constraint on LPG, you know, so.
There is, but it's available and it can be used. And from a running cost perspective for those people, it's a better place than diesel. Everyone's very quick to judge on using fossil fuels. And I get it, but there's no actual way away from it just now. Not for this country, and not for a lot of.
No,
world
most
just-
countries
not
don't
the
have
world
that.
just-
that
Germany's
ability.
just putting in a FSRU as we
Yeah.
speak.
Cool. Any other questions or is that a stretch or a hand?
Pretty base then. You see perhaps a minimum load shedding stage.
I mean, probably, as I say, Eskom's probably better than me to answer that. What I can say, you know, as we've all mentioned today, right? So a lot of the renewables is coming online, but there's grid constraints that are coming online slowly, and there's technical constraints. So there's a whole bunch of issues with, you know, renewables. It's not 100% the saving grace on the situation. Coal plants are getting decommissioned and they are in savage states of disrepair, right? We all know that. It is what it is. There's no clear answer. It's just we've been in load shedding probably since 2007, 2008, roughly. 2022, I don't see anything that's going to take it away anytime soon. Renewables not going to do the job. Renewables can ease the job. It can facilitate, you know, it can ease it, but it's not going. It causes opportunities. It also causes challenges, as we see with issues like balancing market mechanisms, all these kind of things. Batteries are coming online. Lithium-ion batteries are able to provide 4 to 8 hours of power. Cross-border hydro is something that can probably do us a great thing in sort of 5 to 7 year window. If we're able to deploy that, that's optimistic. We 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on cross-border, I mean, we have great examples in SAP of the impact of renewables on the grid. I mean, there we're talking intermittent hydro, maybe than rather intermittent PV. But I mean, I understand some of the restrictions on SAP growth. Volumes have increased, but the grid issues have increased too. And because they don't have dispatchable technology within their mix, they used to use Eskom excess power to stabilize the grid. Now they're using Morapule B, and that's not working out so well. So we're seeing the challenges in SAP from a lot of renewable penetration, and we expect the same thing to be here.
Yeah, I think just the point is looking at the new generation coming online to replace the old going generation and the problems with the existing fleet. So you've got the decommissioning that's happening, you've got the unplanned outages, you've got all of these different things happening. You look at the generation coming online to replace it. And you can almost look at certain forms of renewable energy. You almost look at like not energy efficiency, but you can see it taking with sort of captive renewables is taking demand off the grid. There's different things happening. Everything's fragmenting. But if you look at the system as a whole, what we're seeing is that it's almost part of how the picture was painted to us from the beginning, which is that you've got fragmentation, you've got decentralization, and everything's getting decentralized. So instead of having the old system where you've got giant mega generation projects of coal, nuclear, and gas, you're having tiny integrated things here and there. And that's why the wheeling liberalization is so important, because the third part of that mix is the digitalization and the trading, right? And we've obviously are trying hard in South Africa to get that up to speed to allow that to happen. But if you, for example, want to go procure, the conversations in Europe right now are quite interesting from the South African point of view, because people say, okay, we'll just go and procure another PPA. So if your load is 1,000 megawatts and you want to go 100% renewable, you just go and buy 3 or 4 times that, and it's all a virtual thing, and you say 100% renewable. But what happens when there's not that excess on the grid to trade, which is what our situation has always been. We don't have that 24/7 matching electricity thing. So that's why those things that are quite cushy historically in other markets also now not necessarily always the case. And we can't trade from anywhere if have the nicest wheeling agreements in the world, but there's no power to wheel from to, it's all theoretical, it's all theoretical.
There's one more question. Hi.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of community microgrids going ahead in the States that are really well designed, and it's from the municipal level, integrating things like the energy in their water, sort of using PV and cogen to power the wastewater treatment plant, those kind of things. And it's all integrated with the municipality. And a lot of those Munichs, San Diego, places like that, all throughout California are doing really successful community microgrids. And most of those are connected. Most of those are grid connected, but they also have the capability to do those, sort of islanded grid ride-throughs where they're able to de-link from the system and avoid shutdowns. So those type of approaches we should all be looking at that in more detail and seeing how we can apply that here. It might not be a perfect copy and paste scenario, but we can certainly take learnings from that and look to apply it here. And I think that it's not being talked about enough. Yeah.
So I mean, good example, what I understand is I think it's Baldwin Properties. Apologies if I'm using the wrong name, but their configuration works on the sort of one-bedroom flats around a big central location. You have PV on all the roofs, PV on the car parks, PV around the pool area, I guess it makes thing. And then they have centralized solar water heaters, and they basically store the energy in the excess hot water. But they're also configured for batteries when the battery price point comes down, because the cost of it's a 600,000 rand house that's not going to afford a 10 kilowatt battery or yet. But they've rewired it already, saying when the price point is there, we can then add additional generation and come from there. So they already planning for microgrids, and they're using the cheapest battery in town, which is your own tank of water on your roof. Until they get so people are planning it and they're thinking ahead. Cool. I think I'm going to call it now, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking your time today. I think hopefully there are a few drinks outside, and hopefully you can join us. And we are having another session at 5 o'clock. You're welcome to join us for different topics. Not the same again. Part 2. Shirley will be doing a few more positive jokes, I think. No more fires talk or grid falling over or anything. We'll just do happy thoughts. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.